I'm 94 years old, and for more than 50 years I've carried a secret no one would believe, even if I begged them to prove it. Between 1973 and 2018, up in the hills of West Virginia, I met the same Mothman at my cabin again and again, long enough for it to show me things about humanity I wish I didn't know. This is the truth I've avoided telling my entire life, and why I can't hold it in anymore. My name is Earl Whitaker. In 1973, I was 43 years old and freshly widowed. Margaret had died that spring from cancer, and I couldn't stand being in our house in Charleston. Everything reminded me of her. The kitchen where she'd make cornbread on Sunday mornings, the porch where we'd sit and watch the sun set over the hills, even the damn wallpaper she'd picked out in '68. So I did what any broken man does. I ran away. I had a small inheritance from Margaret's family and some savings from my years working at the chemical. I bought a piece of land about 30 miles east of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. 50 acres of dense forest with a creek running through it. The previous owner had built a small cabin back in the '50s. Nothing fancy. 1 bedroom, a main room with a wood stove, an outhouse, and a hand pump for water. No electricity, no phone line. It was exactly what I needed. I moved in during July of '73, driving up in my '68 Chevy pickup with everything I owned packed in the bed. My supplies were simple: canned goods, a kerosene lamp, some tools, my hunting rifle, and a transistor radio so I could catch the news and the occasional baseball game. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by oak trees and white pine that stretched up like cathedral columns. The nearest neighbor was 6 miles away, old Herman Price, who ran a small general store at the crossroads. For the first 2 months, I saw nothing unusual. I spent my days chopping wood, repairing the cabin's roof, and trying to figure out how to live with the silence. Margaret and I had been married for 21 years. The quiet was like a physical weight. Then came September 17th, 1973. I remember the date because it was a Monday, and there'd been talk on the radio the night before about that tennis match, Billie Jean King beating Bobby Riggs. I woke up around dawn to a sound I'd never heard. A low, resonant cry that seemed to come from somewhere near the creek, maybe 200 yards from the cabin. I grabbed my rifle and went to investigate. The morning fog was thick, rolling through the trees like something alive. I followed the sound, my boots crunching on the forest, and that's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a large bird, caught in something. It was crouched near the creek bank, partially hidden by ferns. But as I got closer, maybe 30 feet away, I realized this was no bird. The thing was massive, easily 7 feet tall, even crouched down like it was, covered in dark gray feathers or fur. I couldn't tell which. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, and folded against its back were wings, enormous wings that must have spanned 15 feet, but it was the eyes that froze me in place. They weren't red like the stories from Point Pleasant said. They were silver, like polished mercury, and they were looking right at me with an intelligence that made every hair on my body stand up. A Mothman, a real, living Mothman, not 5 years after the Silver Bridge collapse that had made them famous. Here, on my property, watching, my rifle was already raised, finger on the trigger. This was 1973. There wasn't any internet, no cable TV. I knew about the Mothman from newspapers and magazine articles. Most people thought it was a hoax or mass hysteria, but some people thought it was real and dangerous, connected to the bridge disaster that killed 46 people. Standing there, looking at this creature bleeding into the moss, I knew the skeptics were wrong. This thing was real. The creature made that sound again, not aggressive, more like a question. It gestured weakly toward the creek with one clawed hand, and I saw it was injured. One of its legs was bent at an unnatural angle. 5 fingers, I noted. Long, articulated fingers that could probably grip a tree branch or tear through metal without effort. I lowered the rifle slowly. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was something in those silver. But I went back to the cabin, grabbed my first aid kit and old towels, and returned to. The creature watched me approach, its breath coming in short, painful gasps. I'm no doctor, but I'd seen enough injuries at the plant to recognize a bad fracture. The lower leg was broken, probably from a fall. I had no way to set it properly, but I could clean the wound and try to stabilize it. For the next hour, I worked while this 7-foot creature lay perfectly still, allowing me to touch it. The feathers, because that's what they were, felt almost metallic, like they were made of something stronger than keratin. When I poured peroxide on the wound, it made a sound low in its throat, like distant thunder, but didn't pull away. I used 2 straight branches and some rope to make a crude splint, wrapping it as tight as I dared. The creature sat up slowly, a movement that took obvious effort, and looked down at its leg. Then it looked back at me. And then it did something that cracked my understanding of reality wide open. It nodded, a clear, deliberate nod of understanding. This wasn't just an unknown animal, this was something else entirely. I backed away slowly, giving it space. The creature stood, balancing on one leg, and tested the splint carefully. It made that thunderous sound again, softer this, and I got the feeling it was saying thank you. Then it spread those massive wings, and even injured, the sight was breathtaking. They caught the morning light, and I could see intricate pattern in the feathers, designs that seemed almost deliberate. It took off with difficulty, favoring the good leg, and disappeared into the canopy above. I didn't expect to see it again, but 3 days later I found a freshly killed rabbit on my porch. No note, no explanation. Just a rabbit, cleanly killed, still warm. I looked out into the forest and saw nothing, but I knew it was watching. That's how it started. Over the next 2 years, the pattern continued. I'd leave food scraps at the edge of the clearing. Apple cores, bread crusts, leftover beans. They'd be gone by morning. Sometimes I'd find things in return. Fish from the creek, wild mushrooms arranged in neat piles, once a whole deer haunch that kept me fed for 2 weeks. I never saw the creature clearly during those first years. Just glimpses. A shadow moving between trees at dusk. A massive silhouette against the moon. The sound of wings in the darkness. But I knew it was there. Watching, learning about me the same way I was trying to understand it. In the spring of '75, I was splitting wood behind the cabin when I felt that familiar sensation of being observed. I turned slowly, and there it was, standing at the edge of the clearing, maybe 50 feet away, in full daylight. It was even more impressive in clear light. Taller than I'd remembered, probably 7.5 feet. The feathers were a deep charcoal grey, with hints of iridescent blue when the sun hit them right. The face was somewhere between human and owl, with that prominent brow and those enormous reflective eyes. We stared at each other for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. Then I did something that must have looked insane. I raised my hand in a wave. The creature's head tilted, like a bird trying to understand something. Then slowly, deliberately, it raised one of its massive hands and mimicked the gesture. That's when I knew this was going to be something bigger than I'd ever imagined. By 1976, the creature and I had developed what I can only call a relationship. Not quite a friendship, that word implies too much familiarity, but a careful understanding. It would appear every few weeks, always at dusk or dawn, always keeping distance, but getting gradually closer. I started calling it August in my mind, because that's when we truly began to communicate. That summer, I bought a Polaroid camera at Hermon's store. The old man rang it up while the radio played Afternoon Delight. "Going to photograph wildlife?" he asked. "Something like that," I said. I never used it to photograph August. Every time I thought about it, something stopped me. Maybe it was respect. Maybe it was understanding that proof would ruin everything. The Mothman in Point Pleasant had brought nothing but chaos and fear. I didn't want that for August. Instead, I started keeping a journal, a green notebook I bought at the same store. I documented everything, dates, times, behaviors, observations. I still have those journals, 15 of them now, stacked in a box under my bed. August's intelligence became more apparent with each encounter. In September of '76, I was working on replacing some rotted boards on the cabin steps. I set my hammer down to measure a piece of wood, and when I turned back, the hammer was gone. I looked up to see August standing 20 feet away, holding my hammer, examining it with intense curiosity. I held out my hand, palm up. August studied me for a long moment, then walked forward, closer than it had ever come, and placed the hammer in my hand. Its palm was rough like leather, worked hard over years. We stood there, maybe 8 feet apart, and I got my first real look at its face in detail. The eyes were more human than bird, deep silver with flecks that caught the light. The face had a nobility to it, an ancient quality. There were scars, old ones, accumulated over decades of living in the wild. "Thank you," I said, even though I didn't think it understood English. August made a sound, a soft rumble from deep in its chest, and touched its own chest with one finger. Then it pointed. It was asking my name. "Earl," I said, touching my chest. "Earl." August's beak-like mouth moved, trying to form the shape, but no sound came out that resembled speech. Instead, it made a different sound, 2 quick pulses, almost like "Earl," and touched its chest again. I understood. It was giving me permission to name it, or perhaps telling me it already had a name I couldn't pronounce. Either way, August stuck. The late '70s were strange years for America. Carter was president. Gas prices were through the roof. I remember paying 65 cents a gallon in '78 and thinking the world was ending. I'd drive into town once a month for supplies in my Chevy, listening to the Eagles and Fleetwood Mac on the 8-track player I'd installed. The world was changing fast, getting more complicated. more uncertain. But up in the mountains, time moved differently. August and I existed in a bubble, separate from disco and the energy crisis and the Iranian hostage situation. We were building our own language, our own understanding. By 1978, August would sometimes sit on the far side of the clearing while I worked, just watching for hours. I'd talk to him, mostly about Margaret, about the life I'd left behind, about loneliness. I don't think August understood the words, but it seemed to understand them. Sometimes a soft response was trying to comfort. That's when I started noticing the lesson. One afternoon in June of '79, I was trying to fix my chainsaw. I'd been at it for 2 hours, getting more and more frustrated, cursing and throwing tools. August was sitting at its usual spot, watching. When I finally gave up and stomped back toward the cabin, August stood and walked to the chainsaw. I watched as it picked up the tool, a screwdriver, and examined it carefully. Then it looked at the chainsaw, tilted its head, and tried the same thing I'd been attempting, removing the air filter. But August did it slowly, carefully, without force, and the screw turned. I walked back over, amazed. August handed me the screwdriver and stepped back. "Patience," I said aloud, understanding the lesson. "You're telling me I need patience." August made that rumbling sound of approval. Over the next year, I watched August demonstrate patience in dozens of ways. The way it would sit motionless for hours, waiting for fish in the creek. The way it would carefully extract grubs from rotting logs, never rushing, never forcing. It was teaching me without words. And I was beginning to realize these weren't just lessons about survival. They were lessons about being human. In November of 1979, I made a mistake that almost cost me everything. I'd driven into Charleston supplies and stopped at a tavern. Had a few too many beers, got to talking with some locals about hunting season, and stupidly, I mentioned seeing something unusual on my property. "Unusual how?" asked a guy named Dale, probably mid-30s, wearing a caterpillar cap. "Just big tracks," I backpedaled. "Strange behavior in the wildlife." Dale's eyes lit up. "Mothman tracks? Jesus, Earl, you serious?" Word spread fast in small community. Within a week, I had 4 trucks of hunters show up on my property, rifles ready, talking about becoming famous. I ran them off, told them I'd been drunk and making up stories. They left, but the damage was done. I'd put August in danger because I couldn't keep my mouth shut. I didn't see August for 3 months after that. December, January, and February passed, with no sign, no tracks, no gifts of food. I thought I'd lost it forever, that the noise and presence of those hunters had driven it away permanently. Then, on a morning in early March 1980, I woke to find August sitting on my porch. Not near the porch, on it. Maybe 5 feet from my front door. I opened the door slowly, carefully. August looked at me with those silver eyes, and I swear, I saw something like forgiveness, or maybe understanding that humans make mistakes. It reached into the feathers on its chest and pulled out something small, held it out to me. I stepped forward and took it, a smooth river stone, perfectly round, the size of a silver dollar, warm from being kept close to its body. A gift, an acceptance. I sat down on the porch and August sat beside, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from its body. We sat there for maybe 20 minutes, watching the sun come up through the trees, neither of us making a sound. That's when I understood the second lesson. Forgiveness is a choice, not a feeling. August had every reason to disappear forever, to see all humans threats, but it chose to come back. It chose to trust again, despite everything. I cried that morning, right there on the porch, first time since Margaret's funeral, and August didn't move, didn't react. Just sat with me while I worked through 50 years of accumulated grief and shame and loss. When I finally looked up, August was holding out one massive hand, palm up, an invitation. I placed my hand in its palm, and August's fingers closed gently around it. We sat like that, man and creature, both scarred, both lonely, both trying to understand what connection means, until the sun cleared the mountain. That was the moment our relationship changed from observation to something deeper. Something I still don't have the right words for, even now, 45 years later. The 1980s brought change everywhere, except my mountain. Reagan was president, MTV launched in '81, and suddenly everyone was talking about music videos. The world was getting faster, louder, more complicated, but August remained constant. By 1981, our meetings had become more frequent, sometimes twice a week. August had begun bringing me things I didn't understand, arrangements of stones in patterns, carefully constructed piles of sticks. Once, a perfect circle of pine cones in the clearing. I documented everything in my journals, sketching the pattern, trying to decode meaning. Then my neighbor Herman showed me something his granddaughter had made in school, an art project using found objects from nature. That's when it clicked. August wasn't leaving random arrangement, it was creating art. The next time August appeared, a cool April evening with fog rolling through the trees, I tried something new. I gathered stones from the creek and arranged them in a spiral pattern on a flat rock. Then I stepped back and waited. August emerged from the forest, approached the stones, and studied them for several minutes. Then it looked at me, and I could have sworn it smiled. Not a human smile, but something in the eyes. A warmth that hadn't been there before. August sat down and began rearranging the stones into a different pattern. A circle with radiating lines, like a child's drawing of the sun. When it finished, it looked at me expectant. "I see it," I said, laughing. "It's beautiful." August made that rumbling approval sound and added one more stone to the center. That became our new form of communication. Not words, but shared creation. I'd make something, August would modify it, or create a response. We were having conversations through art, through symbols neither of us fully understood, but both recognized as meaningful. In July of 1982, something happened that taught me the third lesson. I'd gone into Charleston supplies and stopped at the new Safeway on Main Street. While loading groceries into my truck, I witnessed an argument between a father and his son in the parking lot. The kid was maybe 10, had knocked over a shopping cart accidentally. The father was yelling at him, loud and angry, calling him stupid and clumsy. The boy was trying not to cry, apologizing over and over. I didn't intervene. None of my business, I told myself. But it bothered me the whole drive home. 2 days later, August appeared while I was splitting. It watched me work for, then approached closer than usual, maybe 12 feet away. It picked up a piece of wood I'd split poorly, jagged and uneven, and held it up to show me. Then August took another piece, one I'd split cleanly, and held them side by side. I thought it was critiquing my work, maybe showing me the difference in quality. But then August did something unexpected. It placed both pieces together carefully, gently, as if the poor cut and the good cut were equally valuable. It made a soft sound and touched its chest, then pointed to both pieces of wood. The message hit me like a lightning bolt. Both pieces were still wood. Both had value. One wasn't worthless because it wasn't perfect. "You're talking about that kid," I said aloud, even though August couldn't have known about the parking lot. "You're saying we're too hard on each." August set the wood down and made a gesture I'd seen before, touching its eyes, then sweeping its hand toward the forest beyond my property. "Look, observe, understand." I realized then that August had been watching humans for far longer than just the years it had known me. Decades, maybe. Travelers, hunters, hikers, passing through these mountains. It had observed us the way Jane Goodall observed chimps, studying our behaviors, our cruelty and kindness, our contradictions, and August had drawn conclusions. Over the next few years, August showed me more. In 1983, it led me to a spot about a mile from the cabin where someone had dumped trash. Old tires, beer cans, a rusted refrigerator. August stood there, gesturing at the mess, then at the pristine forest around us. The comparison was obvious. Disgust was evident in its body language. "We're destructive," I said. "We don't respect what we have." August touched its chest, then touched a tree trunk, then the ground. The message, "I am part of this. You are separate from it." That was lesson 4. Humans had forgotten we were part of nature, not above it. In August of 1985, I remember because "We Are the World" was everywhere on the radio, and I'd bought a battery-powered cassette player for the cabin. August showed me something that changed everything. It brought another creature to the clearing. I was inside making coffee when I heard an unusual sound. 2 distinct vocalizations, one I recognized as August, another higher-pitched, more musical. I grabbed my rifle out of habit and looked out the window. August stood at the clearing's edge with a smaller version of itself. Not a child. This one was adult size, maybe 6.5 feet tall, with lighter grey feathers that had hints of lavender when the light hit them right. Female, I guessed, though I had no real way to know. I set down the rifle and stepped onto the porch, my hands visible and empty. The 2 creatures watched me. August made a series of soft sounds to its companion, communication I couldn't decipher but recognized as complex. The female remained behind, cautious but curious. August walked forward alone, picked up a stick and drew in the dirt. 2 tall figures, one smaller. Then August pointed at the female, at itself, and swept its hand toward the distant mountain. Family. August was showing me it had family. The female had come to see if I could be trusted. "You have a mate," I said, "or a sister. Family." August made that affirmation sound. The female never came close that day. After maybe 10 minutes, she retreated into the forest. But August stayed, and I understood what had just happened. August had brought its family member to see me, to prove to her that not all humans were dangerous. That was lesson 5. Trust is the most precious thing any being can offer, and betraying it destroys more than just a relationship. It destroys the possibility of connection. I never saw the female again. I don't know if she died, left, or simply chose to remain hidden. But that encounter made me realize August's loneliness probably mirrored my own. We were both isolated from our kind, both seeking something we couldn't find in our own species. By 1987, I was 57 years old. My hair had gone completely gray. Arthritis had started in my hands, and I needed reading glasses from the drugstore to write in my journal. August looked older too, more silver in its feathers, a slight stoop in its posture, movements a bit slower. One evening in late September, August and I sat on opposite sides of the clearing as the sun set. I was reading a week-old newspaper from Charleston. Something about the stock market crash. Black Monday, everyone losing money, panicking about the... August made a question. I looked up to find it gesturing at the newspaper, then at me, with obvious confusion. Money, I tried to explain. People are upset because they lost money. August tilted its head, clearly not understanding. We use these paper pieces to trade for things we need. Food, shelter, tools. August stood up, walked to the edge of the forest, and returned with a freshly caught trout. It held up the fish, then gestured at the forest around us, trees, water, sky, and made a sweeping motion with its arm. The meaning was crystal clear. Why do you need paper when everything you need is here? I couldn't answer that. I had no good answer. August set the fish down between us, a gift like always, and looked at me with something like pity. That's when I understood Lesson 6, maybe the most important. Humans had created elaborate systems of value that separated us from what actually sustains us. We'd convinced ourselves that abstract concepts like money and status were more important than food, water, shelter, connection. We'd made our lives incredibly complicated, and August couldn't understand why. Neither, sitting there in the fading light with arthritis in my hands and a decade of isolation behind me, could I. The late 80s rolled into the 90s, and the world felt like it was accelerating beyond recognition. The Berlin Wall came down in '89. I watched it on a small black and white TV powered by a car battery. The Soviet Union collapsed. The Gulf War happened. Everything was changing, shifting, the old world order dissolving. But my life remained simple. The cabin, the forest, and August. In the spring of 1990, I turned 60. My body reminded me of it constantly. Bad knees from years of hard work, a persistent cough from too many winters breathing wood smoke. Hearing that wasn't what it used to be. August was aging. I estimated it was somewhere at 60s or 70, though I had no real way to. Its movements had become more deliberate, careful. The silver in its feathers had spread across most of its chest and face. We were two old beings meeting in the woods, both aware our time was limited. That awareness changed things. In June of 1990, August did something it had never done before. It entered the cabin. I'd left the door open on a warm afternoon, was inside organizing supplies I'd bought in town. I heard heavy footsteps on the porch and turned to see August's massive frame filling the doorway. We stared at each other. This was a boundary we'd never crossed. The cabin was my space. The forest was August. But now August was standing in my kitchen, looking around with obvious curiosity. It approached my small table, where I'd been sorting through old photographs. Pictures of Margaret, my parents, our wedding day in 19... August picked up the wedding photo carefully, holding its enormous hands, studying Margaret's face with intense focus. That's Margaret, my wife. She died a long time ago. August looked from the photo to me, back to the photo. Then it did something that brings tears to my eyes even now, decades later. August touched Margaret's face in the photograph with one clawed finger, gentle and reverent. Then it touched my face the same way. The gesture was unmistakable. It understood loss. It understood grief. It was telling me it knew what I'd been carrying all these years. I broke down, sat right there at my kitchen table and sobbed, while this creature that most people thought was a myth stood beside me, one massive hand resting lightly on my shoulder. When I finally composed myself, August carefully placed the photograph back on the table and picked up another one, a picture of me and 3 other men at the chemical plant, circa 1968. August studied it, paying particular attention to how close we were standing, arms around each other's shoulders, all of us laughing. Then August made a sound I'd never heard before, something between a sigh and a question. It gestured at the forest, then back at itself. Alone. You miss them too, I said. Your family, your people. August's response was to gather all the photographs showing me with other people and arrange them in a line on the table. Then it pointed at each person, then at the empty cabin around us, and finally at itself in the forest. Lesson 7 hit me like a freight train. Humans need each other, but we keep choosing isolation. We build walls, we create distance, we convince ourselves we're better off alone. But we're not. We're dying inside, just like August, just like I was. We were both living proof that isolation, even chosen isolation, was a kind of slow death. After that day, August came inside the cabin regularly. Not every visit, but often enough that I started keeping a sturdy bench by the door that could support its weight. We'd sit together in the main room, August examining my books, my tools, my radio with fascination. In November of 1991, I bought a Polaroid camera, a newer model on sale for $79.95 at a store in Charleston. I'd resisted for years, but I was 61 now, and the thought of dying without any proof of August's existence bothered me more than it used to. When I showed August the camera during its next visit, it recoiled initially, suspicious of the strange device. But I took a photo of the cabin interior and showed it the developing picture. August watched in amazement as the image appeared. Then it wanted to see more. I took 3 photos that day. One of August, sitting in the doorway, backlit by afternoon sun. One of its hand next to mine, for scale. One of us both, side by side on the porch, taken with the camera's timer. I still have those photos. They're locked in a safe deposit box in Charleston, along with my journals. Evidence I've never shown anyone until now. August became fascinated with the concept of photographs, of capturing moments, preserving memory. It would point at old photos, then at the forest, as if asking why I didn't photograph the trees, the creek, the mountains. I guess I never thought they needed preserving, I admitted. They're always there. August shook its head, a gesture it had learned from watching me, and led me outside. For the next hour, it showed me things I'd walked past 1,000 times without really seeing. A spider's web jeweled with morning dew, the pattern of lichen on a boulder, the way light filtered through the canopy at a specific angle. Lesson 8. We photograph people because we know we'll lose them, but we ignore the world around us because we assume it's permanent. Nothing is permanent. Everything deserves attention, appreciation, remembrance. By 1992, I'd been meeting August for 19 years. The world had continued its frantic evolution. The internet was becoming a thing. Cell phones were getting smaller. Everyone was reading about email and the information superhighway. But none of that touched us in the mountains. What did affect us was the increasing presence of hikers and tourists. The Appalachian Trail wasn't far from my property, and more people were discovering the beauty of these hills. In July of '92, a group of college kids camped about 2 miles from my cabin. I heard them before I saw them. Loud music from a boombox, laughter, the pop and hiss of beer cans opening. They stayed for 3 days and left behind a mess of trash, carved their initials into several trees. August showed up the day after they left, more agitated than I'd ever seen it. It led me to the campsite and stood there, gesturing at the damage. The carved trees seemed to upset it most, deep gouges in the bark that would take years to heal if they healed at all. They're young, I tried to explain. They don't think about consequences. But August wasn't buying it. It picked up a beer can and crushed it in one hand, then threw it at the ground in obvious disgust. Then it did something calculated. It walked to a tree, raised its hand as if to gouge the bark like the kids had done, but stopped inches away. It looked at me, making sure I was watching, then gently touched the tree instead, almost caressing it. The message: the choice to harm or not harm is conscious. Those kids knew what they were doing. They just didn't care. Lesson 9. Cruelty and thoughtlessness aren't signs of youth or ignorance. They're choices, and humans choose destruction far more often than choose preservation. That was the beginning of a darker period in our relationship. August was seeing more human activity in the forest, and none of it was good. Trash, vandalism, illegal hunting, noise. It was watching its world being invaded, and it couldn't understand why we were so determined to ruin everything we touched. I couldn't explain it, because I didn't understand it either. In 1994, something happened that nearly ended everything. A development company bought land 5 miles south of my property and started building vacation. The sound of construction echoed through the mountains for months. The creek ran muddy with runoff. Animals I'd seen regularly for years disappeared. August came to the cabin in March of that year looking different, not just upset, but something deeper, defeated. It sat on the porch, and for the first time since I'd known it, August looked old. Not just aged, but worn down, broken. I sat beside it, and we listened to the distant sound of chainsaws and bulldozers. "I'm sorry," I said, though the words felt worthless. "We're a destructive species. We can't seem to help ourselves." August turned to look at me with eyes that held something I'd never seen before: judgment. For the first time in 21 years, August was looking at me not as an individual, but as a representative of humanity. And humanity was found wanting. August stood, walked to the edge of the clearing, and didn't look back. It just disappeared into the forest. I didn't see it again for 9 months. The silence of those 9 months was worse than the loneliness after Margaret died. At least with Margaret, I'd had memories, photographs, the certainty that what we'd shared was real. With August, I started questioning everything. Had I imagined the depth of our connection? Had I projected human emotions onto a creature that was simply tolerating? I was 64 years old, living alone in the mountains, talking to something most people believed was a hoax. Maybe I'd lost my mind years ago and just hadn't noticed. Winter of 94 into 95 was brutal. Heavy snows, temperatures dropping below zero for weeks, the kind of cold that makes your bones ache. I spent most of January and February inside, burning through my wood supply, listening to talk radio to remind myself that other humans still exist. The construction stopped in late February. Too much snow, ground too frozen. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a wound. March brought a thaw, and with it, August. I was hauling water from the creek on a grey morning when I saw it standing at the far edge of the clearing. Thinner than I remembered, feathers matted in places, moving with obvious stiffness. We stared at each across 60 feet of muddy ground. I set down the water bucket and waited. August approached slowly, stopping about 50 feet away. Close enough to see new scars on its face and body. Close enough to see how much had aged, how much both of us. I didn't think you'd come back, I said. August made a low sound, not quite the rumble of approval I knew. Something sadder, more weary. It gestured at the forest around us, then at itself, then at me. Then it touched its chest over its heart and held up one clawed finger. One. Alone. The same. Yeah, I said, my voice breaking. We're the same. Both of us watching our worlds disappear. August sat down heavily, and I sat too, ignoring the cold mud soaking through my... We sat like that for maybe an hour. Two old beings who'd somehow found each other and didn't know how to let go. Finally, August stood and gestured for me to follow. It led me deeper into the forest than I'd ever gone, to a spot about 3 miles from the cabin where the development had stopped. The contrast was stark. On one side, ancient forest, cathedral quiet and alive with the sounds of birds returning for spring. On the other, a wasteland of stumps and mud and shattered trees. August stood at the boundary between the two worlds and touched a massive oak that had been spared by maybe 50 feet. The tree was old, probably 300 years or more, its bark thick with moss. Then August walked across the boundary into the clear cut and touched a stump, same size as the living tree, probably the same age, cut down and hauled away to become lumber for vacation. August looked at me and I understood lesson 10. Maybe the most important one August had been trying to teach me all along. Humans measure value by what we can extract, consume, profit from. We don't see the intrinsic worth of existence itself. That tree had survived 300 years of storm, fire, disease, only to be reduced to 2x4s because someone wanted a view of the mountain from their weekend. We're afraid, I said aloud, trying to make sense of it. Afraid of not having an, of not being an. So we take and take, thinking it'll fill whatever's empty inside us. August made a sound I'd never heard before, something between a growl and a keen, raw and painful. Then it did something that broke my heart. August sat down in the clear cut, surrounded by devastation, and put its head in its hand. It was grieving, not just for the trees, but for everything, for its lost family, for the shrinking forest, for the impossibility of stopping what was coming. I sat beside August in the mud and stumps, and we grieved together. Our meetings after that took on a different quality, less teaching, more companionship. We were two survivors clinging to something that couldn't last, both knowing it but unwilling to admit it. In the summer of 1996, I had a health scare, a mild heart attack that landed me in the hospital in Charleston for 5 days. When I got back to the cabin, August was waiting on the porch. It knew somehow. Maybe it had come by while I was gone, found the cabin empty, sensed something was wrong. August examined me carefully, touched my chest gently where I assumed it could feel my heartbeat. Then it did something extraordinary. It lay down on the porch and positioned itself so I could lean against it, using its body as a backrest. We stayed like that for hours. August's warmth and steady breathing keeping me grounded, keeping me calm. That's when I understood the final lesson. Lesson 11. The greatest thing any being can offer another is simple presence. Not solutions, not wisdom, not even hope. Just the willingness to stay, to be there, to witness each other's existence without trying to fix what can't be fixed. By 1997, I was 67, and August was visibly failing. Its movements were slow, labored, the silver in its feathers had spread completely, and there was a wheeze in its breathing I didn't like. I was failing too. 2 more small heart episodes, arthritis so bad some mornings I could barely make a fist, hearing mostly gone in my left ear. We were running out of time, and we both knew it. August's visits became less frequent, every few weeks instead of weekly, then once a month. When it did come, We didn't do much. Sometimes we'd sit in silence. Sometimes I'd read aloud from books, even though August couldn't understand the words. Sometimes we'd walk slowly through the forest together, two old friends saying goodbye to a world we'd shared. In September of 1997, August brought me something it had never offered before. A tuft of its own feathers, carefully pulled and twisted into a small bundle. It placed it in my hand and closed my fingers around it. A keepsake, a memory, a way to prove, if only to myself, that this had all been real. Thank you, I whispered, for everything, for teaching, for seeing me when I didn't want to be seen. August touched my face with one massive hand, gentle as a whisper, and made that rumbling sound one last time. The last time I saw August was March 15th, 1998. I remember the date because it was exactly 25 years after our first encounter. I woke that morning to find August sitting on the porch, backlit by dawn. It looked terrible, emaciated, feathers patchy, breathing shallow. It had come to say goodbye. I sat beside it, and we watched the sunrise together one final time. The forest was waking up around us, birds singing, a deer moving through the underbrush, the creek rushing with snowmelt, all the life we'd witnessed together for a quarter. August reached over and took my hand, held it in both of its massive palms. We sat like the sun neared the mountain. Then August stood, slower than I'd ever seen, and walked the forest. At the tree line, it turned back one last time. It raised one hand, not a wave, more like a benediction, and then it was gone. I never saw August again. I searched for months afterward, found no body, no sign, no evidence beyond the memories and the tuft of feathers. Maybe August to die alone, the way many creatures. Maybe it walked till it couldn't walk. I'm 90. I left the cabin in 2005 when my health finally forced me into assisted living in Charleston. The cabin's still there, falling apart, reclaimed by the forest. The property's in a conservation trust now. It'll never be developed or logged. People ask me why I'm telling this story now, after keeping it secret for so long. The truth is, I wasn't waiting. I was processing, trying to understand what August taught me over those 25 years. Here's what I learned. What I think August was trying to show me about humans. We've forgotten how to be present. We're always rushing, always consuming, always taking, never just being. We judge each other brutally, but we're all just trying to survive, all carrying wounds we don't show. We've separated ourselves from nature and called it progress, built complexity and called it civilization, created abstraction and called them more valuable than the real things they represent. We're capable of profound connection, but we choose isolation. We're capable of preservation, but we choose destruction. We're capable of wisdom, but we choose convenience. And yet, and this is important, we're also capable of change, of choosing different, of seeing the world through different eyes if we're willing to sit still long enough, be quiet enough, humble enough to learn from something we don't understand. August didn't hate humans. If it had, it never would have returned after those hunters came. Never would have spent 25 years teaching a stubborn old man how. August just wished we were better, kinder, more aware, more connected to what actually mattered. I wish that too. The tuft of feathers is still in my bedside table here at the. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I take it out and remember. Remember sitting in the forest with something impossible. Remember being seen, fully seen, by eyes that held no judgment, only curiosity and sadness and hope. If you take anything from this story, take this. Slow down, look around, see the world, really see it, before it's gone. Connect with someone different from you. Learn that value isn't about what you can extract or consume. And if you're ever in the mountains of West Virginia, in the deep forest where the old trees still stand, be quiet, be respectful, be open. Because maybe, just maybe, something's watching. Something that's been observing us far longer than we've been looking for. Something that knows what we are, what we could be, and what we're choosing to become. August taught me that the biggest mystery isn't whether Mothman exists. It's why we, despite all our intelligence and technology and supposed superiority, are so determined to destroy the only home we've ever known. I'm 94 years old, and I still don't have an answer to that question. But I know this. August gave me 25 years of lessons about patience, forgiveness, presence, and the choice between isolation and connection. And the greatest lesson of all was this. The measure of a being is not in what it can destroy, but in what it chooses to protect. For 25 years, August chose to protect me, to teach me, to show me a different way of seeing. Now it's my turn to protect August's memory, to tell this story so that maybe, somewhere, someone will understand. The Mothman of West Virginia wasn't a harbinger of doom. It was a teacher, a friend, a mirror, showing us what we've lost and what we could still become. August is gone now, but the lessons remain. The choice remains. We can keep destroying, keep isolated, keep choosing fear over understanding. Or we can do what August did. Choose connection over safety. Choose presence over perfection. Choose to see the world and each other with eyes that look for beauty instead of threat. I'm 94 years old, and I've carried this secret for 50 years. Now, you carry it too. What you do with it, that's your choice. Remember that somewhere in these mountains, a creature that could have killed me chose instead to teach me. And ask you, what would the world look like if we all made that choice?